Episode fucking 12. What are we doing here? I'm just kidding. All right, so welcome to the podcast. I've got a couple things for you. First off, state of the game. Uh, Flyover video update. I can't remember for the life of me if I covered this last week. I feel like I did, but I've been talking with so many people over the last week that I can't remember. So I'm gonna cover it again. The flyover video at this point in time could be done anywhere between 2 weeks from now and January, middle of January. I'm told early January. I'm gonna tell you middle to late January, just because buffer, which is fine because when we get it, when we have it, we'll release it to the public. But we won't be doing the Kickstarter until after Christmas. Why? Because how in the hell could a little no-name game, no-name crew compete with Christmas spending? So that's why. If you got any big bonuses that you're not using for Christmas, save them up. No, I'm just all right. So that's the update on the flyover video. From what I can tell, there's been some resizing being done to an issue for a very particular issue, but it has been resolved. So that was the underlying problem for that. Forum life. Forum life is going strong. Honestly, I haven't been paying too much attention to it. We've been going about restructuring the way that we process information internally. So I've been working on a lot of documentation in regards to that, and a lot of other backdoor stuff that you guys hopefully never have to see. It's all boring shit that would absolutely drive you insane. But the forums, I do check it. I think for the most part once a day. If I'm really busy and I'm just really beat and exhausted, I don't look at it every day. If there's anything major that needs my attention, it usually gets brought to my attention. So nothing ever gets overlooked. There have been some good questions about some things. One of the items we're going to be talking about tonight specifically, because I feel that no matter how much typing can be done, there's just not enough. There's not a way for me to properly represent the information, and it's just it's the fact that typed out text has a lot of limitations on what you can present and what you can't present, and it's the reality of things. So the social media life, I should probably take it off now because we have a social media guru on board with us. If you're into social media, I'm going to start reselling this again. But if you're into social media specifically and you want to get involved, let me know. We have somebody leading the department now. We just need some people to help out. It's nothing major. We're not putting major tasks on this. This isn't a huge selling aspect right now. Honestly, the site itself is really there to give a lot of context leading up to the Kickstarter, but also when the Kickstarter launches, we didn't want people saying, well, but you've got nothing on your website. Like, there's nothing about the game at all. We wanted to provide a lot more for people to go and be able to see when the Kickstarter goes, because that's one of the two major elements for the Kickstarter to be successful is going to be, do we have information? How long have we been doing this? Are we really in it just to kind of get to it and whatever, or are we ready to actually build a game? And the second one obviously being proof that we're building the game. Last week we went over the most effectives for weapons and armor. I went into pretty decent detail on that. I had some questions asked and answered. If you want to check that out, check out podcast number 11. And we talked about balance, and balance is an ongoing thing, so you hear me bring it up on different things we're talking about. In that regard, we talked about momentum abilities, weapon versus armor, and then the balance of a class in the entirety of the game. All right, so this week, first, actually, you know what? I'll lead with this second because I know some people show up a little later in the podcast, and I don't want them to miss this information. I guess I can cover it twice. Nah, there's no value in that. All right, so first, we're going to talk about the auction houses, right? So this is a big subject. This is very important. honestly, this is one of those core systems where if you don't have a way for players to trade openly, you you kind of slapping players in the face. You're really punching your game in the dick is what it's come down to, right? So things like sitting in chairs, waving at people, basic emotes, being able to build a group, being able to trade, inspect. There's a whole bunch of subsystems, very minor elements that they at this point in the game, at this stage, we're talking 16 years later, they should just be in every freaking MMO that releases. And if an MMO releases without it, the reality is one of two things. One, they didn't really give a fuck about you. They're just trying to make money, which is most business in and of itself. Or two, it was something overlooked because they weren't discussing, right? A lot of these things wind up being. I'm sorry, the camera's off. I didn't realize that. You wind up being. What the hell was I saying? So a lot of these things you wind up overlooking, and if you're in open communication with all the people interested in the game, there's a lot of times where somebody will bring something up and you go, oh shit, we forgot. I don't think we've had anything like that yet. I can't remember. I think it would pop in my mind if we had something like that. I know I've seen some good ideas out there for ways to do things or new things to do, but I don't think we yet have seen anything, which tells me it's good. I mean, 5 gamers really, playing or putting this game together. I would hope that those small systems would be a part of the game, right? Because we all appreciate them when we see them, and we hate the developers when we don't see them. So, auction house. Now this one is not a subset system. A lot of times it's treated like a subset system, but it's really not. The auction house is a very important system. Without an auction house, the game will collapse. Without a way for players who are not... So there's a lot of elements to this. The most important, though, is I play generally, my gaming time is, I live East Coast, so I play anywhere from the hours of noon to about midnight, right? 12-hour gap. And it could be any time within that for an hour or even 6 hours or even all 12 hours, depending on my day, depending on what I've got on my board. There are days where I absolutely grind out 12 hours and not even think about it. I don't care. That's how I like the game. There's a lot of times though where I'll sit there and I'll play 4 or 5 hours, and if I'm highly entertained, I don't even think twice about it. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't even realize it's happening until well after the event, and that's probably the average day. When I'm on at those times, only 4 to 5 hours a day, that's a whole nother 19 hours in the day. Not only that, but my time does not sync up with somebody else's 4 to 5 hours, which means they may play at the same, times at night as me. So for them in Germany, it could be 9 o'clock at night to midnight. For me, 9 o'clock at midnight happens hours later. I won't even see. I might see them back end. Maybe back in. If I'm getting on a little earlier, they're getting off a little later. Might see them back in. But we're not really syncing up, right? But that doesn't change the fact that they've got a good that I want to purchase, or I've got a good that they want to purchase. So how do I make that more available to them? Well, that's when the auction house was created. The original was, meeting in East Commons Tunnel. I think some summers did Greater Faydark, but meeting in East Commons Tunnel was the original, auction house player trading system, where you would trade a bag to a player. You would tell them what you got in zone chat. I think it was global chat. I can't remember. It's been so damn long. And then they would show up and open up a trade with you, and you would put a bag in their inventory or in the trade window. And at that point, they could open up the bag and look at each item and inspect each item. And there's no trade happening at that point. It's just to let them see what you've got. And you would, be very cautious about this. Some people have accidentally hit the trade button when they meant to hit cancel and lost out on a lot of items. So that works to the capacity it was created in, right? I mean, you're talking about 600,000 players at cap, 400,000 on average. At any given time, there was maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people that you were gonna not given time, in a year's time, 2 or 3 thousand people that you were going to meet. That's a lot of market that's not being touched. So East Commons trading became kind of a stalemate, right? It was a base starting point. Needed to evolve. Absolutely needed to evolve. So there was a mix. EQ created the bazaar where players could leave their characters on overnight, buy specialized bags, put those items in those bags, and now players can search for those items. And then WoW, Final Fantasy 11, I believe, did it first. Wound up creating an auction house, essentially where you go to a centralized location. One, two, three. I think there was four different places, three major cities, and then Juneau, I want to say, um, where you could interact with an NPC who would actually sell the item for you. You would uh, put the item up on the auction house for a desired price, and then it would sell for them. Um, that was a good evolution. It started out as region only, and then WoW did a full. I think WoW. I wasn't there enough for WoW. This is what I understand. I think WoW started out with Horde versus Alliance, or maybe they were always global. You've seen some auction houses, as Neo Solidus has pointed out on our website, as he was disgruntled about certain aspects of the system, um, or concerned, whatever. That there were some the global trade network or galactic trade network from Swoltar was independent for each faction, and then they wound up merging it. They had one where you could go to and post, but it was in a PvP area, and nobody fucked around with that. Nobody cared. So there was a little bit of evolution in the auction house. It's gone stale, and which is fine. It doesn't need to always evolve. There's no desire for it. We have taken the auction house and we've actually incorporated it into a storyline. One of our main storyline, but it doesn't come until after the launch storyline has been fully revealed, fully exposed. And at that point, there's a new main storyline, another set of tasks that must be resolved that players will get into that absolutely revolve around the auction house. I told you, this game has a lot of strong sandbox elements. This is one of them. I know some people are going to be upset. Oh, just leave the auction house alone. Don't touch it. We promise you, it's going to function the same way all other auction houses have functioned as far as the full aspect of it. There are, however, requirements for you. There's a little bit more involvement on the player's end. Why? Because we just don't feel, as players ourselves, we don't feel like there should be more in a damn auction house. It should be more involved. What's the story? How does this function? Why is it that I can trade to all these people, but there's just invisible lines? Like when you sit down with a player and they say, all right, what's the story of the auction house? What's the lore behind it? What makes it work? And somebody says magic, there's a fucking problem. Seriously, there's a problem. When you're creating a full 3D environment, you should have as many 3D elements as you can create, as many things and they got to be sound, they have to make sense, they have to function, but they should be there. So the players in our auction house system will be building faction. It's not difficult. We're not talking about months of time to build this faction. We're just talking about a little bit of effort on the player side. Part of that goes into keeping gold sellers and the troll bots and whatnot from destroying the market, as opposed to anything else. But it's so much more than that. There's power to be had in the auction house. Anybody who believes that there is no power in the money behind the auction house was never on the WoW server where the guy bought up the entire auction house and completely controlled the market for like 6 months. You're out of your damn mind. If you don't believe there's power there, then you've never played the auction house minigame. If you think it's as simple as posting an item for a price, selling it, losing the taxes or whatever on it, then that's fine. Enjoy that belief. It's naive. There's a touch of ignorance in it, but you can continue to believe it. I'm not going to tell you that it has to be any different. You do whatever you want, but go out there and earn the full capacity of that auction house. Not just that auction house, but the entirety of all 5 auction houses. Put them together, bridge them together. You want the full capabilities of a real world. I mean, we're not putting in elements like starving and freezing cold, but there's a lot of things that can absolutely be put in there that aren't tedious to gameplay. Once you have the faction, you're good with the faction. I mean, it's not like we're talking about destroying yourself here. There may or may not be some balances. We haven't worked out our entire faction system as it stands. There's a lot of details that still need to be hashed out. Opposing factions. If you earn this faction, should you lose in these areas, stuff like that. We do have opposing markets in this entire game. So there's an entire storyline behind all this that players are going to be able to shape the way that the entire world functions. Who represents who protects who, how NPCs respond to you and other players. And I mean, there's far more to this than just stepping in an empty space where NPCs do what they were programmed to do, and everything's absolutely predictable, and it's boring after 2 days. So we're not trying to create a system that's overly complex, but we are trying to create a system that has depth. I say trying, I mean we've created a system that has depth. Explaining the entirety of the system is a little difficult. Like Neo said, everything sounds great on paper. The reality is there's a lot of this that doesn't necessarily sound great on paper, because you're going to look at it and you're going to say, wait a minute, I feel like I'm being gimped, but it's not how it's working, right? So what people do all the time is when you fluff something up and make it sound awesome and whatnot, it's very misleading. It's easy to draw players in and get them excited about something when you're filling them up with a whole bunch of bullshit. They become very excited about it, and then they get to it and they find out it's absolutely nothing like what you mentioned. We're never going to do that shit. We're going to tell you exactly how shit functions. That's going to cause a little bit of worry. Absolutely. If you're intelligent, if you're in this for a real game, if you're here to help us create a real MMO that challenges every aspect of what you're here to do, then you're here to criticize, and you're here to make notes, and you're here to question things and be cautious about a lot of shit. We're here for the same shit. You should hear some of our damn meetings. It's not just so we're gonna add 28 classes. All right, cool. Add 28 classes. Not how it went down. Trust me. We question ourselves over and over. Is this too many classes? Do we even have enough roles for classes? Are they performing enough different tasks and whatnot? We're sent class ideas all the damn time based on the classes we have out right now. It's pretty impressive, and I tell people the same thing. If we add classes, which we likely will, it'll be in expansions. Classes will absolutely be expansion content, not major updates. Major updates will come, at the change of stories and whatnot, while the expansions come to the updates will be to prep for the expansion in between, and the updates or the expansions will be all new. I don't know. I can't properly explain the difference between what our expansion and our updates will be. Just know that there's going to be a massive difference between them. So I'm gonna get into this before I explain the differences between tier 1, 11, and tier 16 auction houses. And this is something that Neo brought up that he seemed really frustrated about, and I would be too if this was the absolute on it, right? This is just how it's not that. If the core infrastructure was going to be how it was going to be. So in your tier auction houses, you do have basic functionality. There's, again, a whole entire story behind all this stuff. There are people that lead these. It's not a free market, right? Nothing's ever a free market. Some games just allow it so the players can trade and trade and trade. There's way more to it than that. When we talk about making challenging decisions, we don't just mean on a personal level. We mean on an entire game level. We can't change multitude of aspects throughout the game, but we can absolutely add a ton of depth to a lot of aspects, and this auction house is one of them. I'm very borderline giving too much information, so I'm trying to find ways to say this without doing that, because Wicked would absolutely destroy me. But let me throw that over there. So in order for these merchants who are now taking your goods and selling them, right? These merchants, these trade experts, they're people too. All right, this is absolute across the board. These NPCs are people too. There is a lot of elements to them. We've taken all the like really ridiculous aspects out. We're not putting in, shit that would make you say, why would you even add that? We're adding in elements of these NPCs or people too, that make sense, that can be used, that have depth and context and purpose, and we're putting them in the game. And one of them is these NPCs. They work for a living. They're not just computer generated graphics that you're interacting with because the code says you're allowed to. Yeah, they're that, but they're not just that. There's so much more to them. They have lives. Your quest givers, people you're talking to, they have lives. You're not just going to be able to walk up to a quest giver at any point in time, no matter what time of day or what time of month it is, without consideration for their natural habits, for their personal habits on what they do. So, for instance, we're talking about our one of our tier one cities being a treetop city. And this city, we're talking about twice a year putting a festival in the city. That festival means a whole bunch of wood elves and others who are there to appreciate the festival. Um, they're going to travel to the city. Now the city's in the trees. There is a capacity. Typically, you're not going to notice a capacity because there's no reason to have to make anybody notice it. You're not going to have 5,000 players show up, and it's a rough number. 5,000 players show up and swamp that city, right? If it happens, I'll color me impressed, but I just don't see that kind of thing happening. If you're talking to a quest giver who's a wood elf, who's a wanderer, right, and it's one of those days, he could have already taken off for that festival. You're gonna have to be aware of these kind of things. You're gonna have to understand these kind of things. Um, our NPCs have lives. The fisherman's not waiting for you until midnight and then waiting even more and more and more for 10 freaking years. That guy's going to catch fish. He's going to clean the fish and gut the fish and cook the fish and hang out with his wife and kids. He's got a life. He's got to do things. I know. Lena, what are you doing? You make this shit tedious for me. I have to consider other people or NPCs and time restraints and all this shit. Yeah, a little bit. It's kind of become the typical scenario where the quest givers adhere to the players. I mean, they're not. They are. They're not machines, right? NPCs are people too. They have feelings. They get tired. Some NPCs can die. A lot of NPCs can die. Most NPCs can die. Um, in regards to, the banking system, these NPCs are going out of their way to sell your items. This is no different than if you were going to, I don't know, some type of broker, maybe a pawn shop broker, right? And you're co-signing with them and saying, all right, here's an item. I say it's worth $50,000. Well, if he doesn't know you, right? If that pawn shop owner doesn't know you, and you just barely got on a level where he's like, all right, come, let's put some stuff up for trade. He's probably not going to move a $50,000 item for you. Now, if you build your faction, you become the guy's really good friend and whatnot, and you've done a lot of stuff for him, and you're taking care of threats and other issues, he's probably going to try to push that item even if it won't move, right? That's the only restrictions you're going to find in regards to this. How many items you can put up, those kind of things will happen as well. But the only true restrictions are when you first know this guy, it's a person. You have to respect these NPCs and see them as people. If you don't want to, I mean, you're probably not going to enjoy this game, because we've got a ton of quests written up right now that are absolutely dependent on NPC capabilities, on what NPCs do. Hell, we got quests where if you cross an NPC, he's going to send people after your ass if you don't come after you himself or herself. These NPCs will have a whole list of tasks that they can perform, that they choose to perform based on certain scenarios. It's an artificial intelligence, right? Because we don't want real artificial intelligence in there. Then the NPCs are going to start playing PvE, and then nobody can compete with NPCs because AI, once it starts learning, it doesn't stop. People are a little different. So anyway, so the only restrictions we've got on that are because of the reality of how faction works, of the reality of somebody going out of their way to sell these items to you and or for you, and knowing that there's a high risk that they might not move, but they're putting their name on the line. You know, they've got a boss and they've got things that they've got to do. They've got quota they've got to meet. Otherwise, they're not generating income and they're not pulling in money, and their boss is going to fire them. So there's consideration there to be made. It's Think of the faction system as credit. Now, our faction system is a 3D faction system, and we're working on the names and exactly how that functions, but we know the general idea. We know essentially how a faction system functions. And I laid out a little bit of a spoiler in there for people on the forums, but it's going to be a rather unique faction system. We wanted something a little bit more along the lines of what Dungeons and Dragons does. You know, you got the, what is it, the neutral, the law evil or law good, or chaotic evil or chaotic good, and I don't remember all the names. I haven't messed with the table too often. I absolutely know how the table works. I don't memorize the names. So, but we wanted something along those lines, as something that was more in depth for the players, something the players could almost physically touch when they interact with it. And that's just the at launch system. There's going to be a little bit more to the faction. Instead of adding just a million factions on top of factions on top of factions, we wanted to give more substance to the factions that you do obtain. So, all right. So, as far as the restrictions, all restrictions can be moved. If you go right now, what I'm calling it is all blues in your faction, so that's all as high as you can get it faction. If you go all blues, you won't see a single restriction, unless there's one bound to your account type. If you're free to play, you've got natural restrictions that are going to happen. Um, if you're buy to play, I can't remember if we still had limitations on how many items you could post as buy to play. If there is, it'll be high enough not to be a true issue, but low enough that people, gold sellers again, right? We have to come up with a 3D system to combat gold sellers too, and we believe we've got that. And this is one of the ways. It shouldn't affect players, but it will absolutely affect the gold sellers and the bots who are farming shit.